Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a mystery that will leave you scratching your head, quite literally, and wondering if your anatomy is as conventional as you thought. Imagine strolling through a dusty ancient marketplace, and you see a group of people headless. Yes, you read that correctly, headless, but they're not just wandering aimlessly, they're actually holding conversations, working on crafts, and living their daily lives like anyone else. Sounds like something straight out of a fantasy movie. Right. But this isn't a scene from some science fiction saga. It's about the Blemmyes, the ancient civilization known for having no heads, but rather faces located right on their chests. Talk about a game of what's that thing on your body? Before you start thinking this is some elaborate joke or a misguided episode of a reality TV show, let me assure you, the Blemmyes were no laughing matter in ancient times. They were real enough to have been recorded by some of the most famous historians, artists, and scholars of the time. You've probably never heard of them unless you're a fan of obscure, quirky, ancient tribes or have a particular fondness for people with anatomical features that defy all logic. But tonight, we're going to unravel the weird and wonderful world of the Blemmyes. And trust me, it's way more fascinating than it sounds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Post your location and local time in the comments. We've got a long and winding journey ahead of us tonight. So buckle up, because you're about to enter a world where heads are optional and faces can be found in places you'd least expect. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Alright, let's get this started. The Blemmyes, those wild, headless folks, probably sound like something out of a medieval myth. And well, in a way, they are. But they're more than just a whimsical story. They actually have historical roots. The Blemmyes were said to inhabit the vast stretches of North Africa, particularly near what we today call the Sahara Desert. Imagine a barren, scorching landscape where the sun beats down so intensely you can feel it through your eyelids. This is where the Blemmyes were said to roam. Historians and ancient travellers first described the Blemmyes as an enigmatic people, with bodies just like ours, except for the little detail that their faces weren't where they should be. Instead of your standard head on top of your shoulders, their faces were reportedly located directly on their chests. Pretty mind-bending. Right, you'd think they might have had some serious trouble with things like identifying who's talking to you, or keeping your face out of the soup. But you'd be surprised. According to reports, the Blemmyes seemed to function just like anyone else, except they had to adjust to the unique situation of not having a head to turn around when you hear someone calling your name. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait, who exactly were these Blemmyes? And how did they become such an important part of ancient lore? Good question. The first major references to the Blemmyes come from the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who is often called the father of history. Herodotus wrote about many strange creatures, and the Blemmyes were one of his more memorable entries. He described them as a tribe from a far-off land with no heads. And of course, this naturally piqued the curiosity of people in the ancient world. They were placed in the same category of oddities as people with dog heads or those living in extreme environments, which only helped to amplify their mystique. Interestingly enough, it wasn't just Herodotus who mentioned the Blemmyes. Several other ancient texts, including works by Pliny the Elder and Ptolemy, also reference these headless humans. The Blemmyes were legendary not only in Greece, but also in Egypt, where they became quite the topic of fascination. Egyptians, with their penchant for recording everything in hieroglyphs, even included depictions of these strange creatures in their art. But here's the kicker: the Egyptians may have thought the Blemmyes were real, but many modern historians are still unsure whether they were actual humans or just a product of wild imagination. Historians still argue whether the Blemmyes were the result of cultural misunderstanding, misinterpretation of existing tribes with distinctive features, or just an ancient game of telephone gone terribly wrong. What's even more bizarre is that some of the descriptions of the Blemmyes didn't just focus on their headlessness. No, the face on the chest feature was what everyone noticed. Imagine going about your day, and instead of looking up to meet someone's eyes, you're looking directly at their chest to make eye contact. That would definitely make social gatherings awkward. Imagine trying to engage in a conversation with someone, and your eyes are basically staring straight at their chest. This would have led to some really interesting body language, to say the least. But here's the thing: while most people were left scratching their heads at the very idea of these headless wonders, the ancient Egyptians and other civilizations seemed to treat the Blemmyes as real, if not slightly exaggerated. Neighbours, the idea of humans living without heads fascinated the ancient world, and who could blame them? In a time when human understanding of biology was minimal at best, the very thought of a headless human was an alluring mystery. It was like discovering a new species, one that defied everything people knew about the human form. Now, let's pause for a second and imagine life as a Blemmyes. Forget about the face issue for a moment. What would it be like to go through life with no head? You'd think there'd be some serious logistical problems. What about hygiene? How do you clean your face if it's in the middle of your chest? Do you still have to wear a helmet? Would they just put their faces in their shirts to keep them warm? And how do you even eat without a head? This would raise so many questions about daily life. While there is no concrete evidence proving the existence of the Blemmyes, the ongoing fascination with them only deepens. They represent the strange and unexplained, the mysteries that historians still try to unravel, and the modern curiosity that insists on knowing just what the truth was behind these bizarre creatures. The ancient accounts, including illustrations, show how seriously some took the idea of these headless beings. It's almost as if they were a symbol of otherness, something too weird to be true, but not so outlandish that people couldn't imagine it. Remember those medieval maps that would mark unknown regions with phrases like "Here be dragons well"? The Blemmyes might as well have been one of those unknown creatures. They fit perfectly into the category of the fantastical beings that the ancient world loved to believe in. Could the Blemmyes have been a tribe with unique cultural practices that led others to misinterpret their features, or were they purely mythical, invented to scare or awe listeners? Historians still argue over this, and it's part of what makes them so intriguing. But this isn't just some historical curiosity. This is a story that keeps evolving over time. The Blemmyes entered not only the academic books of historians, but the imaginative realms of artists, writers, and explorers. It wasn't just the ancient Egyptians or Greeks who were fascinated by them. The story of the Blemmyes would live on through centuries of exploration and discovery. The truth, it seems, is that when you combine mystery, imagination, and a bit of history, you get a tale that never quite dies. So, now that we've set the stage for these curious, headless beings, let's move forward in time. Keep your face right where it is on your neck, preferably because the Blemmyes weren't just ancient oddities. Their legacy echoes through the centuries, evolving in fascinating ways, from ancient Egyptian art to modern pop culture. Their story is far from over. But what exactly is the truth behind these headless legends? Let's take a deeper dive into their history, and maybe, just maybe, we'll start to uncover the mystery that the ancients were so captivated by. Alright, let's keep rolling. Imagine you're sitting in a warm, candlelit room in an ancient city. The walls are adorned with intricate paintings depicting creatures from far-off lands. You're flipping through a scroll, and there it is, a drawing of a creature with no head, but with a face placed right in the middle of its chest. It's a Blemmyes. You probably blink twice, rub your eyes, and wonder if you accidentally stumbled into an early version of a modern art class. But nope, it's not a mistake, so this face on the chest thing. It was considered a perfectly legitimate anatomical feature for these mysterious people, and people were fascinated by it. You might be wondering, how could anyone take this seriously? Right, well, ancient cultures weren't exactly known for their cutting-edge biology knowledge, if anything. They were more into imagination, myth, and the strange. The Blemmyes were just one of the many bizarre creatures that people talked about in those days. We're talking about a time when wild stories like unicorns, cyclops, and yes, headless people with faces on their chests were part of the narrative fabric of society. Historians are still going back and forth about the true origins of the Blemmyes. Some argue that they were simply an ancient misunderstanding, a product of the imagination running wild, while others believe that they could have been based on real-life groups of people who might have had unique cultural or physical characteristics. Historians still argue whether these creatures were just exaggerated accounts of existing tribal features, such as unusual body art, or whether these were truly headless people who, as bizarre as it sounds, roamed the world without heads and lived to tell the tale. It's almost like the ancient version of telephone, where details get twisted and transformed as they pass from person to person. But let's not get too lost in the speculative weeds just yet. The fact that these creatures were described by so many ancient sources, from Herodotus to Pliny the Elder, tells us that the story had staying power. And the most mind-boggling part, the face on the chest thing, wasn't just a one-off idea, it was taken seriously. People were so convinced that these beings existed that they included them in their records, their art and their folklore. Think about it for a second. How many things in history have we believed in that were later revealed to be misconceptions? The earth being flat, that the sun revolved around the earth. These misconceptions were widely accepted until science caught up with reality. In that sense, the idea of headless people with faces on their chests isn't that far out. It was just another story in a long line of wild tales that people believed, either because they had limited knowledge or because they were simply swept away by the mystery of the unknown. So, let's try to wrap our heads around this strange phenomenon. Was there ever a tribe or group of people who didn't have heads, but faces on their chests? Could the ancient travellers and historians have been mistaking another tribe with, say, a unique style of body modification? Or were the Blemmyes just a product of fantastical imagination? Historians still argue about this. But here's something that might just make you squint in thought. The human desire to believe in things like the Blemmyes wasn't just a passing fancy. It was rooted in the desire to explain the unexplainable, to understand the vast unknown world beyond one's borders. And the Blemmyes were part of that world, so mysterious and strange that they sparked not only the imagination of those who encountered them, but also the artists and writers who immortalised them. Let's take a look at how these headless wonders were depicted. Ancient Egyptian art often portrayed them with exaggerated features, highlighting their distinct no-head appearance, and they were often shown as part of larger mythological stories. But these weren't just random sketches, they were symbolic representations. The Egyptians were known for their deep connection to symbolism and the divine. So it's possible they saw the Blemmyes as embodying something deeper, perhaps a kind of otherworldly wisdom or insight, something that wasn't bound by the ordinary rules of human anatomy. Think about it. A face on your chest could symbolize a whole different perspective on life, one where perception was literally turned upside down. Who knows? Even the Greeks, who were a little more skeptical and rational, couldn't help but bite on the Blemmyes myth. It showed up in the work of philosophers like Pythagoras and poets like Homer. And even though their writings may have been more metaphorical than factual, they still indulged in the possibility that these strange creatures existed somewhere on the fringes of the known world. Ancient Greek art often depicted creatures in fantastical settings, half men, half beasts, or people with odd features that made them seem completely alien. The Blemmyes fit right into this bizarre category. So, where did this strange notion of people without heads and faces on their chests come from? There's still debate about whether these reports were entirely based on misunderstanding or exaggeration. Perhaps the Blemmyes were simply a group of people from a remote area, and their unusual appearance was misunderstood by travellers who had never seen them before. For instance, their practice of body painting or tattooing might have been interpreted as a face on their chest, or maybe they wore masks or face paint in such a way that it gave the illusion of a face where there should have been none. It's entirely possible that the Blemmyes weren't headless at all, but rather they just had an appearance that confused outsiders. But let's pause here for a moment. This idea of headlessness still sounds like something out of a horror film. No matter how many ways you try to spin it, the concept of humans without heads is inherently unnerving. Yet, this is what makes the Blemmyes so fascinating. They weren't just the subject of historical debate, they were the subject of cultural fascination, even in the absence of hard evidence. Their stories were passed down, retold and imagined by generation after generation, almost as if they were a symbol of a deeper truth about human nature, the desire to understand what lies beyond the ordinary, to confront the mysterious with a mixture of fear and awe. What's even more fascinating is that the Blemmyes weren't confined to just one geographic location or cultural context. These creatures were known to a wide variety of ancient civilizations, from the Greeks to the Egyptians to the Romans, even during the Middle Ages, when the Blemmyes should have been relegated to the dusty corners of history. They were still very much a part of medieval art and literature. This longevity speaks volumes about how captivating and mysterious they were. Maybe it wasn't about whether they were real or not. Maybe it was about the idea of them, the representation of the unknown. The Blemmyes were creatures of paradox. They defied logic, yet they captivated the human imagination. They were headless, but they had faces. They were both a mystery and an enigma. And for centuries, they existed as an idea, not just a myth. And isn't that the beauty of storytelling sometimes? The best tales don't need to be grounded in reality, they just need to tap into something bigger. In the case of the Blemmyes, their story touches on our fascination with the strange, the supernatural, and the boundless possibilities of what humanity could look like in a world where anatomy isn't as predictable as we think. But now, let's take a deeper look at one of the most important elements of the Blemmyes' story, their enduring impact on the imagination of later cultures, from the Egyptians to the Greeks, and even into the modern era. Why do the Blemmyes continue to capture our attention even today? Could there be more to them than just a quirky anomaly? The next step in our journey is to explore why, after all these centuries, we still can't let go of the idea of these headless creatures as we continue our deep dive into the world of the Blemmyes. We begin to realise something fascinating. The idea of these headless humans has persisted through the ages, weaving its way through ancient texts, medieval myths, and even modern pop culture. It's almost as if these creatures are less about literal history and more about the human need to imagine what lies beyond the known. And what makes the Blemmyes even more intriguing is that their story didn't just fade into obscurity, it continued to captivate people for centuries, making appearances in literature, art, and even folklore. So, how exactly did the Blemmyes become such a deeply embedded part of cultural consciousness? Let's take a moment to reflect on the lasting power of myth. In ancient times, storytelling was everything. It wasn't just entertainment, it was the vehicle through which people explained the world around them, gave meaning to the unknown, and created a shared sense of wonder. The Blemmyes fit neatly into this space, not as a physical reality, but as a symbol of something much larger. You see, the Blemmyes weren't just an oddity, they were part of the human drive to create a mythology of the other, that mysterious, terrifying realm that lies just beyond the borders of what we understand. And what better way to represent the other than by imagining a human form that is radically different from our own, a face on a chest. No head, there's no easier way to mark something as strange, as alien. As we move through time, we see that the Blemmyes continue to pop up in unexpected places during the Middle Ages, long after the original accounts of the Blemmyes had been written. Medieval artists and writers began to incorporate these headless figures into their works. But this time, it wasn't necessarily about believing that these creatures existed in the physical world. It was about keeping the story alive in the cultural imagination. The Blemmyes had transformed from a potential historical reality into a symbol, a metaphor, or perhaps a riddle that no one could quite solve. One of the most interesting aspects of this is the way that these headless beings appeared in medieval art. They weren't just a curious anomaly, they were woven into the fabric of the medieval worldview, in an era that valued mysticism, religious symbolism, and allegorical representations of the world. The Blemmyes became a tool for exploring deeper themes. The headless figure could represent the loss of reason, the absence of a clear identity, or the stripping away of what makes someone truly human. And in the context of the Middle Ages, a time when questions of identity, spirituality, and the unknown were central concerns, the Blemmyes were just too good to pass up. But here's the thing, the Blemmyes weren't just mysterious because of their headlessness. They also represented a challenge to the conventional way people thought about humanity. The very concept of a face being placed on the chest is a visual puzzle that stirs up discomfort and curiosity. Why? Because it forces us to rethink our very understanding of what it means to be human. The head, after all, is considered the seat of reason, consciousness, and identity. What happens if you remove it, or rather, place it in a place where we don't usually expect to find it? What does that say about the nature of the person, about how we perceive identity and intellect? Historians and scholars still argue about whether the Blemmyes were truly believed to exist, or whether they were just part of a broader medieval obsession with the strange and unusual. It's also possible that the Blemmyes were simply a fanciful creation based on the misinterpretation of a real tribe. Perhaps the people who lived in regions like Nubia had unique cultural practices or physical characteristics. Maybe they used masks or face paint in a way that confused outsiders. It's not hard to imagine how the face on the chest idea could have evolved from such practices, especially in a time when people didn't have the means to question or debunk these fantastical ideas. But let's take it a step further. What if the Blemmyes were real, but just not in the way we've been taught to think? Imagine a tribe of people who lived in such isolation that they developed a completely unique way of communicating and existing, one that was foreign to all other cultures. Maybe the Blemmyes had practices that involved wearing highly stylized clothing or harnessing symbolic body art that led outsiders to believe they were headless, if we think of them in those terms. Suddenly the whole idea of the Blemmyes becomes a lot more plausible. They wouldn't be some oddity in a far-off land. They'd be part of a much more complex, richly detailed cultural fabric that we've yet to fully understand. Still, there's the question of how these creatures fit into the grander narrative of history. In many ways, the Blemmyes were caught between myth and reality, their story constantly shifting to suit the needs and imaginations of those who retold it. And while we might never have definitive proof that the Blemmyes actually existed, the story itself offers valuable insights into how humans have always used the unknown to push the boundaries of their understanding. In a way, the Blemmyes represent everything that is strange and mysterious about the ancient world and, by extension, everything that is still strange and mysterious about the human drive to understand the unknown. Now, let's talk about how the Blemmyes fit into the larger narrative of mythology and legend. They weren't just a curiosity or a funny story told around the campfire. They represented a deeper cultural and philosophical challenge, in a time when the unknown was often seen as something to be feared or revered. The Blemmyes embodied the mystery of what might lie beyond the borders of the known world. They were a blank canvas, waiting to be filled with interpretations, both spiritual and intellectual, as civilizations like the Egyptians, the Greeks and the Romans grappled with the complexities of identity, belief, and the human form. The Blemmyes became a powerful tool for understanding the human condition. Interestingly, the Blemmyes story didn't end with ancient times. Even in the Renaissance, a period when the Western world was rediscovering classical knowledge, the story of the Blemmyes made a resurgence as European explorers began to travel to more remote parts of the world. They came across new and strange peoples who had been previously unknown to Western society. The stories of the Blemmyes echoed through the ages, and in some ways, the people they encountered, tribes with unusual customs and appearances, reminded them of the headless figures that had once fascinated their ancestors. The idea of the other, of people who are different in fundamental ways, is something that continues to capture the human imagination. And the Blemmyes were a direct precursor to that obsession. And let's not forget how the Blemmyes have made their way into modern pop culture. While they may no longer be the subject of scholarly debate, they still appear in various forms of entertainment, whether it's in movies, books, or video games. The concept of people with faces on their chests has evolved into a kind of symbol for the bizarre and the uncanny. These headless wonders still exist, albeit in a more symbolic form, as characters who challenge our perceptions of humanity and identity. The legacy of the Blemmyes is one that endures through the centuries, transforming from a piece of ancient mythology into a modern-day icon of the unknown. The real question, however, isn't just about whether the Blemmyes were real, it's about what their story represents. The Blemmyes are a reminder that the unknown is an essential part of the human experience. We need mysteries, questions, and strange creatures to fuel our curiosity and push the boundaries of our understanding. And as long as there are people who are willing to look beyond the ordinary, the story of the Blemmyes will continue to resonate with us, challenging us to think differently about the world we live in. So, as we leave behind the mystery of the Blemmyes, let's think about how their story lives on today. It may have started as an ancient myth, but it has grown into something far more powerful. The Blemmyes aren't just creatures from the past. They are a testament to the enduring power of human imagination and the desire to understand the mysteries of life. As we continue our journey through the strange and fascinating world of the Blemmyes, let's take a moment to reflect on the deeper implications of their story. The Blemmyes were not just a curiosity, They were part of a much larger cultural conversation about identity, perception, and the unknown. These headless beings, with their faces on their chests, challenged the conventional understanding of human form, making us question what it means to be truly human. And it wasn't just the ancient Greeks or Egyptians who grappled with the idea of the Blemmyes. Their legacy has continued to echo throughout history, shaping our modern ideas of what is strange and what is normal. Let's rewind for a moment and think about how the Blemmyes fit into the larger narrative of human exploration and discovery. The idea of encountering something completely different, something that defied all reason, is an age-old fascination. The Blemmyes embodied that very concept. They were an anomaly, a mystery that begged to be solved. In a time when the world was still largely unexplored, the very thought of meeting a race of headless people would have been enough to spark intense curiosity. After all, who wouldn't want to encounter something that defied the rules of nature? In the ancient world, stories like the Blemmyes were often used as a way to explore the boundaries of human existence. People used these myths and legends to confront the unknown, to understand the world around them. The Blemmyes weren't just strange because of their appearance. They were strange because they represented a challenge to the very notion of what it meant to be human. And that challenge was one that resonated deeply with people across cultures, in a way. The Blemmyes were a reflection of humanity's innate desire to question its own identity. What happens when you take away the most fundamental aspect of being human, the head, the seat of the mind? What does that say about who we are and how we relate to the world around us? The Blemmyes were an enigma wrapped in a riddle, and their legacy has endured for centuries because of this fundamental mystery. In fact, their story continues to captivate us today because it forces us to think about our own identity and what it means to be normal. In modern times, we are still obsessed with the idea of the other, those who are different from us, those who challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. And the Blemmyes, with their face on the chest appearance, are the ultimate expression of this obsession. They represent the unknown, the other, and the bizarre, all wrapped into one fascinating package. But the story of the Blemmyes doesn't end there. Their image has transcended the pages of ancient texts and medieval manuscripts to become an enduring part of modern pop culture. You may not have realised it, but these headless wonders have made their way into our modern imagination in ways that are both subtle and profound. From movies to books, from video games to graphic novels, the concept of headless beings has become a symbol of everything strange and mysterious in the world. It's almost as if the Blemmyes have become a shorthand for the unknown, a reminder that there are still things out there that defy explanation, that challenge our understanding of the world. One of the most striking aspects of the Blemmyes' enduring legacy is how they have been adapted and reinterpreted over time. In modern pop culture, the Blemmyes have taken on new forms and meanings in some stories. They are depicted as alien creatures, strange visitors from another world, who have come to Earth to challenge our understanding of life. In others, they are portrayed as supernatural beings, part of a larger cosmic mystery that humans are only beginning to comprehend. But no matter how they are portrayed, the Blemmyes continue to captivate our imaginations because they represent something we still don't fully understand: the boundaries of human existence and the limits of what is possible in the natural world. And here's the thing, the Blemmyes, despite their strange and sometimes eerie appearance, are not just about what they look like. They are a reflection of something deeper, something that speaks to our fundamental need to explore the unknown. The idea of a headless person challenges our very concept of identity. It forces us to think about what makes us who we are. Is it our faces, our heads, or something more fundamental? What happens when you strip away the most defining feature of being human, and how does that change the way we relate to the world around us? These are the questions that the Blemmyes force us to confront, and it's why their story continues to resonate even in the 21st century. But the Blemmyes weren't just a symbol of human curiosity, an exploration. They also represented something else: the power of myth. Throughout history, myths and legends have served as a way for people to make sense of the world around them. They provide answers to questions that can't be explained by science or logic. The Blemmyes were a mythic creature, and their stories serve to explain the unknown. But what makes the Blemmyes so fascinating is that they weren't just a product of ancient imagination. They were a reflection of the human desire to explore, to understand, and to push the boundaries of what is possible. And let's not forget the cultural significance of the Blemmyes. In the ancient world, they were more than just a curiosity. They were a symbol of the unknown, of things beyond the reach of human understanding. They were a reminder that there are mysteries in the world that we will never fully comprehend. And even though the Blemmyes may have faded from historical memory, their story continues to be retold in new and creative ways, ensuring that their legacy will never be forgotten. Now, as we step away from the strange and fascinating world of the Blemmyes, let's think about how they continue to impact us today. The Blemmyes represent everything we are still drawn to: the mystery, the otherness, the idea that there is always something just beyond the horizon, waiting to be discovered. Their story challenges us to think beyond the limits of our understanding, to embrace the unknown, and to remain curious about the mysteries that still lie ahead. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the Blemmyes will always hold a special place in our collective imagination. They remind us that there's always more to discover, always more to learn, and that the world is still full of wonders we can't even begin to imagine. But before we wrap things up, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned about the Blemmyes so far. These headless beings, with their faces on their chests, may have been a symbol of the strange and unknown in the ancient world, but their legacy has continued to resonate through the centuries. From ancient Egypt to modern-day pop culture, the Blemmyes represent our fascination with the other, with the mysteries that lie beyond our understanding. And while we may never know the truth about whether they really existed, their story has become a part of the fabric of human culture, reminding us that there is always more to explore, always more to discover, and always more to learn about the strange and wonderful world we live in. So, as we close tonight's journey through the Blemmyes and their headless world, think about this sometimes. The most fascinating mysteries are the ones that we can't fully explain. They keep us thinking, wondering and imagining, and in the end, it's the mystery itself that makes the story so captivating. The Blemmyes may have been headless, but their legacy is anything but. Now that we've ventured through the world of the Blemmyes and touched on their fascinating legacy, it's time to shift our focus just a little. Let's peel back the layers and take a closer look at the impact of these bizarre creatures. As strange as the concept of headless people may seem, the Blemmyes weren't just an odd footnote in history. They became a symbol, a subject of debate, and even a metaphor for the deeper mysteries of the human condition. In this section, we'll dive deeper into the cultural significance of the Blemmyes and how their image has been used, reinterpreted, and passed down throughout the centuries. The Blemmyes were more than just a physical anomaly. They were a metaphor for something far more complex. Think about it. They represent the boundaries of human experience and perception. When we talk about the unknown or the other, we are, in a sense, talking about the Blemmyes, these headless beings, with their faces on their chests, were unlike anything people had ever seen or imagined before. And so, their very existence, real or imagined, served as a way to explore what happens when something familiar, the human form, is distorted into something unrecognizable. It's this kind of challenge to the known world that allows us to reflect on how we see ourselves and others. Let's explore how the Blemmyes were interpreted in different times and places. The ancient Egyptians, known for their elaborate art and deep symbolism, certainly weren't shy about including these creatures in their artistic works. For them, the Blemmyes might have symbolised the other, a people who lived on the fringes of the known world, by depicting these beings with faces on their chests. The Egyptians might have been commenting on the human tendency to fear or romanticise what is unfamiliar. After all, the Egyptians themselves were not strangers to myth and symbolism, and the Blemmyes could have been just another way to explore the mysteries of the world. In the ancient Greek world, the Blemmyes took on a slightly different role, the Greeks, with their emphasis on rationalism and understanding the natural world, might have seen the Blemmyes as an illustration of how human imagination could run wild when confronted with the unknown. This makes sense, considering the Greeks were famous for their elaborate mythologies and their creative interpretations of the strange and the supernatural. The Blemmyes fit neatly into the catalogue of mythical creatures that represented human fascination with what existed beyond the boundaries of reason and logic. In a sense, the Blemmyes weren't just real people from distant lands. They were symbolic of all the things the Greeks couldn't quite understand or explain. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and the Blemmyes were far from forgotten. In fact, these headless beings seemed to gain a resurgence in medieval art and literature. This was a time when the line between myth and reality was often blurred, and the Blemmyes were easily incorporated into the medieval imagination. The Blemmyes were perfect candidates for the medieval mind, a time rife with superstition, religion, and a deep fascination with the unknown. They represented an enigma, a creature that existed outside of the natural order, and as such, they fit perfectly into the medieval worldview, where strange and otherworldly beings were seen as manifestations of the unknown forces at play in the world. It's worth noting that the Middle Ages was a period in which the concept of the other was heavily explored, particularly through art and literature, and the Blemmyes, with their strange appearance and mysterious origins, became emblematic of this concept. They were a visual representation of the human fear of the unknown, but also of our fascination with what lies beyond our understanding. Think about the way the Blemmyes were depicted in medieval manuscripts. These headless beings were not simply drawn for shock value. They were presented as something to be pondered and reflected upon. Their inclusion in these artistic works suggests that they held more significance than just being a strange curiosity. They were a symbol, a powerful metaphor for everything the medieval world struggled to comprehend. As we move forward in time, the Blemmyes begin to shift in how they are perceived. The Renaissance, which reintroduced the study of classical antiquity, took an interest in the stories of the ancient world. The Blemmyes, as part of the mythic landscape, continue to captivate the imagination of the Renaissance thinkers, artists and writers. But by this time, the Blemmyes had transitioned from being seen as real creatures to becoming part of the grand tapestry of myth and legend. They were no longer treated as potential historical figures. Instead, they were embraced as symbols of the unknown, objects of fascination and curiosity. In fact, as the scientific revolution took hold, the Blemmyes, like many other mythical creatures, were gradually relegated to the realm of fantasy. But this doesn't mean their influence disappeared. Instead, the Blemmyes found a new home in the world of literature and art, particularly in works that embrace the Gothic, the macabre and the bizarre. Writers like Edgar Allan Poe and Mary Shelley, who were fascinated by the mysteries of life and death, could have easily drawn inspiration from the Blemmyes in their exploration of the darker sides of the human condition. The Blemmyes became part of a larger conversation about what it means to be human, what it means to be other, and what it means to exist outside the bounds of normalcy. And this brings us to the present day. While the Blemmyes may have faded into obscurity as a subject of serious historical study, their image has persisted in the world of popular culture. The concept of headless beings with faces on their chests has appeared in countless movies, television shows, and books, particularly those in the fantasy, horror, and science fiction genres. Why does this image continue to captivate us? Perhaps it's because the Blemmyes represent something that is both alien and familiar, something that challenges our ideas about identity, humanity, and what it means to be normal, in a world where we are constantly seeking new ways to explore the boundaries of existence. The Blemmyes remain a symbol of everything that is mysterious, strange, and unexplained. In fact, the Blemmyes have become so ingrained in modern culture that we may not even realise how often they pop up in our collective imagination. From movies like The Chronicles of Narnia to shows like Doctor Who, headless creatures with faces in unusual places have become a staple of the weird and the wonderful. These modern-day Blemmyes may not be exact replicas of the ancient creatures, but they carry the same sense of mystery and intrigue. They are the descendants of a long line of mythical beings that have challenged our understanding of the world, and they continue to serve as a powerful reminder that there are still things in this world that we cannot fully explain. But what is it about these creatures that still captures our imagination? Perhaps it's the fact that the Blemmyes represent the ultimate challenge to our understanding of what it means to be human. They force us to question the very nature of identity, what makes us who we are, and what happens when we strip away the most fundamental aspects of our existence. The Blemmyes were headless, but they had faces in their strange form. They encapsulated all the questions and mysteries that continue to captivate our imaginations today. And so, as we draw this section to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate the Blemmyes for what they are, not just a bizarre footnote in history, but a symbol of the unknown and a reminder of the power of myth and imagination. These headless beings may have seemed strange to the ancient world, but their story has continued to resonate through the ages, evolving with each new generation and reminding us that there is always more to discover, more to explore, and more to understand about the world we live in. In the end, the Blemmyes are a testament to the human drive to explore the boundaries of what is possible and to push the limits of our imagination. As we venture further into the story of the Blemmyes, we come to a realization that's as profound as it is unsettling. These headless creatures, with their faces situated on their chests, are much more than an ancient myth or an oddity that's been preserved in dusty texts. No, the Blemmyes represent something deeper, a cultural, psychological, and philosophical exploration of what happens when we face the truly unknown. Imagine a world where human beings exist in a way that's completely different from anything you've ever known. They are not headless in the traditional sense. They simply have faces where they shouldn't, forcing you to see the world in a way that your brain just can't quite wrap itself around. That feeling of being unsure, of being thrown off balance, is what the Blemmyes represent, not just for the ancients who recorded their existence, but for us too. Now, let's try to step back and think about how the Blemmyes fit into the bigger puzzle of human thought. When it comes to mysteries and the strange, we're naturally drawn to the idea of things that challenge our preconceptions. This is why we love ghost stories, alien encounters, and ancient myths, because they make us question the limits of reality. And the Blemmyes, with their surreal, almost impossible physiology, tap right into this universal human curiosity by presenting us with beings that seem to defy the natural laws of anatomy. They force us to reconsider what's possible and, by extension, what's not. Could such a creature really exist? Or was it merely an exaggerated myth born of misunderstanding? The truth is, no one really knows the answer. Historians and scholars still argue whether the Blemmyes were simply a figment of the imagination, a curious misinterpretation of real human features, or whether they were based on some strange cultural practices that led outsiders to describe them in such bizarre terms. Was there, in fact, a tribe or group of people whose physical appearance or body art was so strange that they were misrepresented as having faces on their chests? Or is the whole thing an elaborate metaphor for the idea of the other? The people who live on the fringes of the known world, who defy our understanding of what it means to be human. This question about the nature of the Blemmyes is precisely what makes their story so compelling. It isn't just about a strange physical characteristic, it's about how our minds and cultures react to things that are fundamentally unfamiliar. We can't help but project our own thoughts, fears, and assumptions onto the unknown. And in that sense, the Blemmyes are an embodiment of everything we don't understand. They aren't just a biological anomaly, they're a symbol of the strange, the mysterious, the otherworldly. But let's put ourselves in the shoes of the ancient people who first encountered the Blemmyes. Imagine travelling through the deserts of North Africa, or the fringes of the ancient world, encountering a group of people who look just like you, but with one very unusual difference: their faces are not where you would expect them to be. These headless people might have appeared to you as both fascinating and terrifying, not just because of their appearance, but because they represented something so completely outside your comprehension. And so, the stories about them would have spread stories that evolved over time, growing more fantastical and strange as they were passed from one culture to the next. The Blemmyes, then, weren't just an anomaly, they were a riddle that no one could solve, and that made them even more intriguing. In this sense, the Blemmyes were both real and symbolic. They were real in the sense that they were described in historical texts, seen by travellers, and incorporated into art and literature. But they were also symbolic, an expression of how cultures perceive the other, and how the unknown can often be transformed into something far more complex and terrifying than it might actually be. They were both human and not human. They were both a part of the world, and yet completely apart from it. This duality is what makes the Blemmyes so compelling, even today. In the medieval period, this fascination with the Blemmyes took on new dimensions, as medieval artists and writers embraced stories of the strange and bizarre. The Blemmyes were revived as part of a larger cultural narrative about the unknown. During this time, the line between myth and reality was often blurred, and the Blemmyes became emblematic of a worldview in which anything was possible, where the laws of nature could be bent or broken by the sheer force of imagination. In medieval art, the Blemmyes were not just depicted as strange creatures, they were symbols of everything that existed beyond the known world, representing the mysteries that humanity could not yet explain. What's fascinating about this is that during the Middle Ages, the Blemmyes' headlessness became a metaphor for more than just physical difference. It became a symbol of spiritual or intellectual otherness. Think about it, these creatures weren't just missing heads. They were lacking a core component of human identity. The head, after all, has always been seen as the seat of reason, intellect, and soul. By placing the face on the chest, the Blemmyes disrupted the very foundation of what it means to be human. And for medieval thinkers, this was not just about biology, it was a challenge to the idea of the soul, of identity, and of what it means to be a person. In many ways, this philosophical take on the Blemmyes is one of the reasons they have persisted in modern times. The Blemmyes challenge our ideas about what it means to be whole, and in that sense, they represent a deeply existential puzzle. We are all taught that our faces belong on our heads, that's what makes us human. But what happens when that rule is broken? The Blemmyes force us to confront that question in ways that few other mythical creatures do. They invite us to consider what it means to be human, to be complete, and whether our physical bodies are the true essence of our identity, or if there's something more to it. And that brings us to a key point. The Blemmyes are timeless, because they challenge the boundaries between what's real and what's imagined, what's human and what's not. They represent that place where the physical and the metaphysical meet a space that is neither fully explainable nor fully understood. In the modern world, we are still drawn to the Blemmyes because they force us to confront our own boundaries, both physically and intellectually. The idea of headless beings is a reminder that, no matter how much we think we know, there will always be something out there that defies explanation. And isn't that what makes life so fascinating? The Blemmyes have made their way into modern pop culture, but they are no longer seen as a curiosity or a myth to be dismissed. Instead, they've evolved into symbols of the unknown, whether in science fiction movies, fantasy novels, or even video games. The Blemmyes have become an archetype of alienness, of beings that exist outside the normal bounds of human experience. They are still mysterious, still strange, and still deeply relevant. And the fact that their story has survived for so long, passed down through generations of artists, writers, and thinkers, speaks to the enduring power of the mystery they represent. So, as we conclude our exploration of the Blemmyes, let's take a moment to reflect on what they truly represent. They are more than just strange creatures from ancient myth. They are a symbol of our collective curiosity about the unknown. They represent our constant search for meaning, for understanding, and for connection with the things that lie just beyond our grasp. And in that sense, the Blemmyes will never truly fade into history. They will continue to inspire, to puzzle, and to remind us that there is always more to discover about the world and about ourselves than we can ever imagine. As we continue to unravel the mystique of the Blemmyes, we begin to see a much larger picture emerge, one that's as much about cultural symbolism as it is about anatomy, mythology, and the human imagination. These headless beings with faces on their chests were not merely a fantastical creation of the ancient world. They were deeply embedded in the human psyche, symbolising a fascination with the unknown, the other, and the boundaries of human identity. Their legacy, spread across ancient texts and medieval myths, still resonates with us today, serving as a cultural artefact of our collective curiosity about what exists beyond the boundaries of the human experience. Now, let's get into the real core of why the Blemmyes, despite being headless, continue to captivate us. The more we dig into their origins and the historical context in which they were described, the more we realise that the Blemmyes weren't just a story told to frighten or amuse. They were a metaphor, a powerful symbol of something greater, in fact. One could argue that the very concept of the Blemmyes was born out of a human need to explore the unknown, to challenge the limits of perception and reality, and to question the very nature of what it means to be human. Let's backtrack a bit to their most significant cultural moment, their origins in ancient texts. when the Greeks and Romans first encountered the Blemmyes. They weren't just looking at a strange tribe with an unusual physical appearance. They were looking at a representation of something deeper. The Blemmyes became the ultimate example of human otherness. They weren't just people who looked different. They were people who defied the fundamental idea of what it meant to be human. To the Greeks and Romans, who had a strong sense of order and logic, the Blemmyes symbolised chaos, the breakdown of the human form into something unrecognisable, and by extension, the limits of human understanding. The Blemmyes, with their heads placed on their chests, epitomised the idea that humanity could stretch beyond the boundaries of the ordinary. They were not just an anatomical anomaly, they were a living representation of something unexplainable, something that pushed the boundaries of the human form. In ancient Greece, a culture that placed such high value on reason and beauty, the very thought of a creature with no head would have been deeply unsettling. And yet, the Greeks couldn't help but be fascinated by them. The Blemmyes became an object of both horror and intrigue, a creature that blurred the lines between the real and the mythical, the known and the unknown. This fascination carried over to the ancient Egyptians, who, like the Greeks, were no strangers to myth and symbolism. The Egyptians were experts in creating systems of understanding that blended the supernatural with the everyday world, and the Blemmyes fit perfectly into this framework. But here's where it gets interesting. While the Egyptians might have seen the Blemmyes as part of a larger mythological narrative, they also used them as a means of exploring the unknown. The Egyptians weren't just interested in the physical appearance of the Blemmyes, they were more concerned with what these creatures represented. In a sense, the Blemmyes were a metaphor for everything that lay beyond the known world, everything that could not be easily explained, categorised, or understood. And this, of course, is what gave them their power. The Blemmyes weren't just a curiosity. They were a reflection of humanity's ongoing search for meaning in a world that often seems to defy explanation. But the Blemmyes didn't just remain confined to ancient myth. They became a fixture in medieval art and literature as well. As the Middle Ages embraced mystery, superstition, and the supernatural, the Blemmyes found a new life. Medieval artists, who were often preoccupied with symbolism and allegory, began to incorporate these strange creatures into their work. The Blemmyes became a way to explore deeper themes about human identity, spirituality, and the unknown. During a time when life was often chaotic and unpredictable, the Blemmyes served as a way to process the fears and uncertainties of the human condition. What's particularly interesting about the medieval reinterpretation of the Blemmyes is how they were no longer seen just as bizarre creatures. They were imbued with deeper meaning in the medieval mind. The absence of a head and the placement of the face on the chest wasn't simply a physical anomaly. It was a representation of a deeper spiritual or intellectual shift. Medieval thinkers, deeply entrenched in a worldview that included both the divine and the demonic, could have seen the Blemmyes as representations of a kind of spiritual otherness. These headless beings were not just a challenge to the physical body, they were a challenge to the mind and the soul. This concept of otherness became central to medieval interpretations of the Blemmyes during this time. The fear of the unknown was at its height, with religion and superstition influencing almost every aspect of life. The Blemmyes, with their unsettling appearance, symbolised the cosmic forces that existed beyond the reach of human understanding. They became metaphors for the dangers of straying too far from the natural order, but also for the incredible possibilities that lay in the unknown. The Blemmyes weren't just anomalies, they were symbols of a deeper philosophical and spiritual truth that the world was full of things that could never be fully understood. As we move forward in time, the Blemmyes start to fade from the pages of history. The age of exploration and scientific discovery began to challenge the stories of strange creatures and mythic beings that had once held such sway over the human imagination. With the advent of rational thought and empirical science, the world began to shift away from the mystical and the mythological, and the Blemmyes were relegated to the realm of legend and folklore. But even as the Blemmyes disappeared from serious discourse, they continued to live on in the imagination of storytellers and artists. Their legacy endured because, at their core, they represented something timeless, the human need to explore the unknown, to question the boundaries of reality, and to confront the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. It's here, in the realm of popular culture, that the Blemmyes have truly found a new life. In modern media, whether it's in movies, books, or video games, the Blemmyes, or creatures like them, continue to appear as symbols of the strange and the unknown. They have evolved, of course, into different forms and identities, but the core concept remains the same. They are representations of everything that challenges our understanding of reality, and it's this timeless quality that makes the Blemmyes so enduring. They tap into a deep, universal part of the human experience, our fascination with the strange, the weird, and the otherworldly. In many ways, the Blemmyes have become a part of the modern mythic landscape. They are no longer viewed simply as strange creatures from an ancient time. Instead, they represent something much more profound. The idea that there are forces at work in the world that we cannot fully comprehend. The Blemmyes serve as a reminder that there are still mysteries to explore, both in the world around us and within ourselves. As long as we continue to seek out the unknown, the Blemmyes will remain with us as symbols of humanity's ongoing quest to understand what lies beyond the limits of our perception. So, as we draw this section to a close, let's think about the legacy of the Blemmyes and what they represent in our modern world. These headless beings have transcended the confines of ancient mythology to become symbols of the mystery, the unknown, and the human desire to understand what lies beyond the ordinary. They remind us that there is always more to discover, more to learn, and more to question. And in that sense, the Blemmyes will continue to live on. Not just as a strange curiosity from the past, but as a timeless symbol of the human spirit's unyielding quest for knowledge. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Blemmyes, the more we uncover about their symbolic and cultural significance, their place in ancient history, medieval lore, and even modern-day fascination offers a deeper reflection on the very nature of what it means to be human. By now, you might be wondering what's the real draw of these creatures. Are they just a bizarre footnote in history? Or do they have a deeper meaning that continues to captivate us, the Blemmyes, with their faces on their chests and their heads mysteriously absent? Represent more than just an oddity. They represent our fundamental fascination with what lies beyond the boundaries of our understanding. To fully appreciate their role in history, it's crucial to understand how the Blemmyes were perceived in the ancient world. It's easy for us, in the modern era, to laugh off the idea of people with faces where their heads should be. We've grown accustomed to thinking of the human body as a perfectly designed machine, each part serving its intended purpose. But in the ancient world, things weren't quite as clear-cut. Without the scientific understanding we have today, people looked to mythology and storytelling to explain the world around them. They were drawn to the strange and the unexplained, using it as a way to understand the limits of their knowledge. The Blemmyes, then, were not just a historical curiosity, they were a cultural symbol. to the Greeks, the Egyptians, and other ancient civilizations, these headless creatures were a reminder of the unknown, the things that existed beyond the reach of human comprehension, the absence of a head, the most prominent and defining feature of humanity, was a powerful symbol in itself. It suggested that these creatures were not bound by the same rules as the rest of us. They were alien, foreign, and perhaps even divine, existing outside of the typical human experience. But beyond this symbolic meaning, the Blemmyes also served as a practical tool for exploring the human condition in the absence of a head. These creatures became an emblem of the mind's infinite possibilities. The Greeks, in particular, loved to play with the idea of human limitations, constantly testing the boundaries of reason, logic, and reality. The Blemmyes, in this sense, became a sort of challenge to the human imagination, a puzzle that could never truly be solved, but one that kept people coming back for more. As the centuries passed, the Blemmyes continued to evolve in their symbolic significance. The medieval period, with its deep fascination with the supernatural, mythology, and the unknown, provided the perfect environment for these strange creatures to thrive. During this time, people still clung to the idea that there were forces at work in the world that couldn't be understood by logic or reason alone. The Blemmyes, with their unsettling appearance, were the perfect embodiment of this idea. They were a living paradox, a being that was simultaneously human and non-human, known and unknown. Their very existence made people question the boundaries of life and death, of reason and madness, and of the known and the unknown. In medieval art and literature, the Blemmyes were often depicted as mysterious figures who existed on the fringes of society, far from the centres of civilization. Their strange appearance was seen as a reflection of the mysterious forces at play in the world. Some medieval scholars even believed that the Blemmyes were not just a physical anomaly, but a spiritual one. They were seen as beings who lived outside the norms of society and religion, embodying the fears and mysteries that medieval people struggled to understand. The headless Blemmyes became a symbol of rebellion against the conventional understanding of the world, a reminder that not everything could be explained, controlled, or categorized. But what about their physical description, the headless humans with faces on their chests? What did this bizarre image actually mean to people who lived hundreds, even thousands, of years ago? It's easy to assume that the Blemmyes were just a product of faulty perception or miscommunication. After all, people who had never encountered a particular culture or tribe might misinterpret what they saw and invent strange stories about them. Could the Blemmyes have been a real people whose customs, dress, or body art led to their depiction as headless, or were they just a figment of imagination, a product of storytelling passed down from one generation to the next? Historians still argue about the exact origins of the Blemmyes, and that uncertainty only adds to their allure. In the ancient world, the idea of body modification was not unheard of. Tribes and cultures across the globe have practiced various forms of body art, from tattoos to piercings, to the stretching of earlobes and necks. What if the Blemmyes were simply a misinterpretation of these practices? Perhaps they were a group of people who used masks, face paint, or other forms of body modification in such a way that outsiders believed their faces were actually placed on their chests. This idea would fit with the fact that the Blemmyes were often depicted as both human and not human people, whose customs and appearances were so different from what others were used to that they became a symbol of everything mysterious and unfamiliar. And yet, despite the uncertainty surrounding their physical appearance, the Blemmyes' story continues to captivate us because they tap into something much deeper than mere physical oddity. They represent the human fascination with the other and the unknown. We are constantly drawn to what we cannot understand, to the creatures and beings that exist beyond the boundaries of our knowledge, the Blemmyes, with their headless bodies and faces on their chests, embody that same curiosity that drives us to explore the unexplored, to imagine the unimaginable, and to question what is possible. In the modern world, the Blemmyes may not have the same cultural weight they once did, but they continue to capture our imaginations. The concept of headless creatures has appeared in countless forms throughout history, from ancient myths to medieval stories to modern science fiction, and it's easy to see why the idea of beings that exist beyond the ordinary, who defy the laws of nature, is endlessly fascinating. Whether they are depicted as extraterrestrials, supernatural beings, or simply mysterious creatures from the past, the Blemmyes and their ilk remain a staple of our cultural imagination. They represent everything we don't understand, everything that challenges our preconceived notions about the world. But the Blemmyes are more than just a subject of fascination. They are a powerful symbol of the human desire to explore the unknown. In every culture, there exists a longing to understand what lies beyond the borders of the familiar. The Blemmyes, with their grotesque but captivating appearance, serve as a reminder that there is always something more to discover, something beyond what we can see and touch. Their legacy endures because they tap into that timeless human need to seek the mysterious, to question the unknown, and to challenge the very idea of what it means to be human. As we come to the end of this exploration, we are left with a question that the Blemmyes themselves might have asked. What lies beyond the boundaries of our understanding? The story of the Blemmyes is more than just a tale of strange creatures from an ancient past. It is a reflection of our eternal curiosity, our need to imagine what could be, and our unyielding drive to seek out the mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp. Whether or not the Blemmyes ever existed in the way that ancient texts suggest is beside the point. What matters is that their story endures, reminding us that there are always new frontiers to explore, new questions to ask, and new mysteries to uncover. The Blemmyes will continue to haunt our imaginations, long after we've forgotten the details of their origin. They are more than just a myth. They are a reflection of humanity's never-ending quest for knowledge, for discovery, and for understanding what lies beyond the limits of the known world. As long as we remain curious, the story of the Blemmyes will live on, continuing to challenge us, to inspire us, and to remind us that there is always something more out there, waiting to be discovered. As we journey deeper into the story of the Blemmyes, it's becoming more and more apparent that these creatures, whether they were real, exaggerated, or purely fictional, hold a place in history that transcends the simple idea of a bizarre myth. The Blemmyes are more than just strange beings from an ancient past. They are a lens through which we can examine the human need for mystery, the boundaries of perception, and the deep-seated desire to make sense of the unknown. These headless beings, with their faces on their chests, are part of a much larger narrative, a narrative that questions our understanding of the body, identity, and what it means to be human. So, what exactly is it about the Blemmyes that has allowed them to remain so captivating over the centuries after all? Their appearance alone headless, with faces in their torsos, seems like something straight out of a science fiction story. But, like so many myths, their allure lies in something deeper, the human fascination with the strange, the unfamiliar, and the unknown. The Blemmyes embody that curiosity and fear of the other that has driven exploration, both physically and intellectually. For centuries, the story of the Blemmyes is not just about strange creatures. It's about how we as humans attempt to make sense of the world by creating stories that challenge our understanding of what's possible. The idea of human beings with faces where their heads should be challenges every instinct we have about what makes a person a person. In a world where our sense of self is often so tied to our appearance and our ability to communicate through facial expressions, the idea of a headless being with a face on its chest makes us confront the very nature of identity itself. What does it mean to be human if our physical form is completely different from what we expect? The Blemmyes are not just a physical oddity, they are a philosophical puzzle that forces us to question the limits of human experience. The ancient texts that describe the Blemmyes, most famously Herodotus and Pliny the Elder, tell us that these creatures were said to inhabit distant lands, far beyond the known world. This idea of the Blemmyes living on the fringes of the known world is key to understanding their significance in the ancient world. The unknown was a place of both fear and fascination. People would often create stories and myths about the other to explain the unfamiliar. The Blemmyes, with their peculiar bodies, fit perfectly into this category. They were a symbol of what lay beyond the known, a creature that defied the natural order of things. Their very existence raised questions about what was possible in the world and what existed beyond the limits of human understanding. But the Blemmyes were not simply a creation of ancient imaginations. The fascination with them didn't end with the classical period. In fact, the Blemmyes continued to haunt the medieval mind. The Middle Ages were a time of superstition, mystery, and deep religious symbolism. It was a time when the lines between the physical and the spiritual, the natural and the supernatural, were often blurred. The Blemmyes, with their headless forms and faces on their chests, were the perfect creatures to embody the fears and fascinations of medieval Europe, in a world where the unknown was both revered and feared. The Blemmyes represented the ultimate mystery. Medieval art and literature often explored themes of the strange and the supernatural, and in this context, the Blemmyes became a way to explore deeper themes about human identity and spirituality. Their headless appearance was not just a physical oddity, it was a symbol of something greater. The absence of a head, the seat of reason and intellect, suggested a creature that lived outside the boundaries of human understanding. The Blemmyes were not simply different in their appearance. They were other in a way that transcended the physical realm. They were beings that lived beyond the normal laws of nature, and as such, they became metaphors for the mysteries of existence itself. The Blemmyes' symbolic significance only deepened as time went on. In the Renaissance, when classical ideas were revived and explored anew, the Blemmyes were resurrected as part of the larger tradition of mythological creatures, but by this time, the Blemmyes had shifted from being seen as a possible reality to being embraced as part of the mythic landscape. They were no longer seen as creatures that existed in the real world. They were symbolic of something much larger. The Blemmyes represented the boundaries of human understanding, the things that could never truly be known or explained. They became part of a larger conversation about the mysteries of the universe and the limits of human perception, even as the world began to shift toward a more rational, scientific worldview. The Blemmyes continued to be a part of the cultural fabric. They were no longer seen as a literal reality, but they still held symbolic weight. In a world where science and reason began to take centre stage, the Blemmyes became symbols of the unknown, of the things that science could not yet explain. They embodied the idea that there will always be mysteries in the world that cannot be explained, and that the human imagination will continue to seek out answers, even in the face of the inexplicable. In modern times, the Blemmyes have experienced a resurgence in popular culture. While they may no longer be seen as real creatures, they continue to appear in movies, books, and television shows, often as symbols of the strange and the supernatural. The Blemmyes have evolved into a kind of archetype, a representation of everything that lies beyond the boundaries of human understanding. They are the ultimate expression of the unknown. And their presence in modern pop culture speaks to the enduring fascination we have with the mysteries of life. But what is it about the Blemmyes that still captivates us? Why are we so drawn to these headless beings? These creatures that defy all reason and logic. Perhaps it's because the Blemmyes represent something that we all grapple with, the desire to understand the unknown. They challenge our perception of reality, forcing us to confront the limits of what we know and to explore the vast expanse of what lies beyond our understanding. In a way, the Blemmyes are a reflection of our own curiosity, our own need to push the boundaries of what's possible in a world that is increasingly defined by science, technology, and rationality. The Blemmyes serve as a reminder that there are still things in this world that defy explanation. They remind us that the unknown will always be with us, and that our imaginations will continue to search for answers in the dark corners of existence. The Blemmyes may have existed only in myth, but their symbolic significance remains as powerful as ever. They are a reminder that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more to discover, more to explore, and more to understand. The Blemmyes represent the human spirit's unyielding desire to explore the unknown. They are the embodiment of curiosity, of the need to ask questions and seek answers, even when those answers are elusive, and that is why their story will continue to live on. It is a story that resonates with our deepest instincts, reminding us that there will always be mysteries in this world, and that those mysteries are worth exploring. The Blemmyes may have been headless, but their legacy is anything but. So, as we conclude this exploration of the Blemmyes, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. The story of the Blemmyes is not just a tale of strange creatures from the past. It is a reflection of our own journey as humans, a journey marked by curiosity, imagination, and the pursuit of knowledge. The Blemmyes remind us that there will always be more to discover, more to question, and more to understand. They are a symbol of the human spirit's unquenchable thirst for the unknown, and their legacy will continue to inspire us for generations to come, as we continue to explore the lasting legacy of the Blemmyes. It's crucial to understand not just how they were perceived by the ancient and medieval worlds, but how their presence and absence echoes in the modern age. These creatures, who are perhaps more metaphor than reality, hold a unique space in our collective consciousness. The more we delve into their history, the more we realise that the Blemmyes were not just a passing curiosity. They represent something larger, our unyielding fascination with what lies beyond the boundaries of our knowledge. As strange and unsettling as they may seem, they embody the deepest corners of human inquiry and imagination. And it's in those strange places, those uncharted territories, where logic doesn't apply, that we find something much more meaningful than just odd creatures. The Blemmyes, with their faces placed on their chests, represented the liminal space between the known and the unknown. These beings were not just unique because of their anatomy, they were symbolic of humanity's obsession with what exists beyond our understanding. We all have a natural instinct to explore, to seek the strange and the unexplained, and the Blemmyes are perfect representations of that drive. They were not simply bizarre because of their physical form. The real fascination lay in what they represented a world where the natural order could be disrupted, where reason could be challenged, and where reality itself could bend to the whims of the imagination. When we think about the Blemmyes today, it's easy to dismiss them as a relic of ancient storytelling. After all, in the modern world, we don't typically encounter headless beings with faces where their chests should be. But the Blemmyes persist for a reason. They have managed to carve out a space in the collective imagination, a place where they continue to symbolise the unknowable, the mysterious, and the bizarre. In fact, the Blemmyes' appeal is timeless precisely because they represent something that's very much a part of the human experience. Today, the desire to understand what cannot be understood, we are still fascinated by the strange and the unexplainable, and that fascination connects us to the ancients who first wrote about these headless beings. To understand why the Blemmyes continue to haunt our collective consciousness, we need to step back and look at the larger cultural and historical context in which they were first described, the ancient Greeks and Romans, who were deeply concerned with the nature of human identity and the workings of the world, saw the Blemmyes as a symbol of something beyond comprehension. Their strange, headless form suggested that the world was not as orderly and rational as the Greeks and Romans had imagined. They were an anomaly that defied all expectations, a reminder that there were still mysteries in the world that no one could explain. The Egyptians, too, had their own relationship with the Blemmyes. They were not just another strange group of people to be documented in Egyptian art and literature. Instead, the Blemmyes were part of a broader cultural and spiritual context, one that emphasised symbolism, mystery, and the unknown for the Egyptians. The Blemmyes may have symbolised the forces of chaos that existed just beyond the order of civilization. They were beings who lived at the edges of the known world, where the rules of nature were no longer clear in this sense. The Blemmyes were a metaphor for everything that was mysterious, unexplained, and unsettling. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and the Blemmyes take on an even more symbolic meaning. During this period, there was a great deal of emphasis on spiritual matters, on the mystical, and on the things that could not be explained by rational thought alone. The Blemmyes, with their absence of a head, became an embodiment of the unknown, a reminder that not everything could be understood or explained. In the medieval mind, they were creatures that existed beyond the natural order, beings that challenged the very notion of what it meant to be human. And this challenge, this defiance of the natural order, was precisely what made the Blemmyes so compelling. They weren't just an oddity, they were a symbol of everything that was strange and unexplainable in the world. But let's not get too caught up in the idea of the Blemmyes as merely historical oddities. As strange as they may seem to us today, they represent something much deeper. The Blemmyes have been adopted into modern mythology as well, and their legacy continues to thrive in popular culture. Whether through literature, movies, or video games, the Blemmyes or creatures like them continue to captivate our imaginations. We are still drawn to the idea of headless beings, strange creatures whose very existence challenges our understanding of the natural world. Why is that? The answer lies in the way the Blemmyes symbolise something larger than the limits of human knowledge. They remind us that, no matter how much we think we know, there will always be something beyond our understanding. The Blemmyes, with their faces on their chests, embody the idea that there are things in the world that we cannot explain. They represent the mysteries that we have yet to uncover, the unexplored territory that still lies before us, in that sense. The Blemmyes are a symbol of the human quest for knowledge, the drive to explore what lies beyond the boundaries of our comprehension. This desire to explore the unknown is what makes the Blemmyes so enduring in the past. They were a challenge to the ancient world's understanding of the human form and the limits of the natural world. Today, they serve the same purpose. They represent the things that we still don't understand, the mysteries that remain unsolved. And perhaps that's why we continue to return to them, generation after generation. The Blemmyes are a reminder that the world is full of strange and mysterious things that, no matter how much we try to rationalise, will always be beyond our grasp. They challenge us to question the world we live in and to keep searching for the answers to the questions we haven't yet asked. And let's not forget the power of imagination. The Blemmyes have endured not just because of their symbolic significance, but because they tap into something fundamental about the human condition, our need to imagine. We love to create worlds that are strange and unfamiliar, because in doing so, we expand the boundaries of what's possible. The Blemmyes, with their odd anatomy and headless forms, are the ultimate expression of this need to imagine. They allow us to explore the limits of human existence and to challenge our preconceived notions about what is real and what is possible. As we close out this section, it's clear that the Blemmyes represent more than just strange creatures from an ancient myth. They are a symbol of everything we can't quite understand, everything that lies beyond our grasp, and that's precisely why they continue to capture our imaginations. They remind us that the world is full of mysteries, and they challenge us to keep exploring, to keep searching, and to keep imagining. The Blemmyes may have been headless, but they have left behind a legacy that is anything but. They represent the essence of human curiosity, our drive to explore the unknown and to question what we know. The Blemmyes remind us that the mysteries of life, the strange and the unexplained, will always be with us, and in that mystery, we find the fuel for our imaginations, the inspiration for our stories, and the drive to keep looking beyond the boundaries of the known world. As we continue our exploration of the Blemmyes, it becomes increasingly clear that these headless beings, with their faces on their chests, represent something more than just a peculiar physical anomaly. In many ways, the Blemmyes are an embodiment of humanity's unrelenting curiosity, a symbol of the unknown that continues to captivate our imaginations long after the last myth was told. Their strange form, their mysterious origins, and the way they have evolved through centuries of cultural interpretation reflect our deeper need to understand and explore the world around us. But it's not just their physical appearance that keeps drawing us in, it's what they represent on a much larger scale. The limitless human imagination, the unknown, and the questions we constantly seek answers to. The Blemmyes were not just strange creatures in ancient mythology, they were, in a sense, a mirror to the societies that wrote about them. They were a canvas on which people projected their deepest fears and fascinations. These beings, with their heads placed in impossible positions, weren't just a challenge to the natural order of things. They were a metaphor for everything that was outside of the known world, everything that couldn't be explained, and everything that lay just beyond the reach of human comprehension. When people first encountered the Blemmyes, they weren't just looking at a bizarre group of people with an odd appearance. They were looking at a symbol of the unknown, a creature that embodied the mysteries of the world and the limits of human knowledge. In the ancient world, the idea of encountering the unknown was both exhilarating and terrifying. People were constantly searching for answers to questions that they couldn't understand. In this context, the Blemmyes were the perfect vehicle for exploration. They represented the limits of human perception. Their faces on their chests defied all logic and reason. How could a human being have a face on their chest and no head? The idea of the Blemmyes forced people to confront their assumptions about the body, identity, and human nature itself. The very notion of a creature that didn't fit into the traditional understanding of what it meant to be human was both unsettling and fascinating. Historians and anthropologists still debate the true origin of the Blemmyes. Were they based on real people who were misunderstood by ancient travellers, or were they purely the product of myth, born from the human imagination's need to explain what could not be understood? It's possible that the Blemmyes were a real tribe, one whose customs or physical characteristics were so different from what the rest of the world had seen that they were interpreted as strange and otherworldly. Perhaps the Blemmyes wore masks or practiced body modification in ways that led others to believe they had faces on their chests. But even if they were based on real people, the Blemmyes' legacy lives on because they were transformed into something much more than just a historical account. They became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that there are always things in the world that defy explanation. The power of the Blemmyes lies not just in their strange appearance, but in the way they have been interpreted throughout history. In the ancient world, they were seen as a challenge to the natural order, a physical manifestation of the things that lay beyond human understanding. But as time went on, their role shifted. In the medieval period, for example, the Blemmyes became part of a broader cultural narrative about the unknown and the supernatural. This was a time when people believed in the power of myth and magic, and the Blemmyes fit perfectly into that worldview. They were seen as creatures that existed beyond the limits of human understanding, beings that represented the mysteries of the universe. In the medieval period, when the line between reality and myth was often blurred, the Blemmyes were embraced not just as an oddity, but as a metaphor for everything that was mysterious, unexplained, and beyond the reach of human perception, in an era when superstition and religion dominated much of people's lives. The Blemmyes were a reflection of the deepest fears and fascinations of the time. They symbolised a world that was both magical and terrifying, a world full of unknowns that could not be explained by science or reason. The Blemmyes were not just creatures to be feared or marvelled at, they were representations of the larger mysteries that lay beyond human comprehension. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Blemmyes' story is how they have persisted throughout the ages, evolving into different forms and meanings over time. While their physical appearance may have been exaggerated and distorted over the centuries, the core concept of the Blemmyes remains unchanged. These creatures continue to appear in modern pop culture as symbols of the unknown, the other, and the strange. Whether they are depicted as headless alien beings in science fiction films, or as eerie supernatural creatures in fantasy novels, the Blemmyes have evolved into archetypes that represent the limits of human understanding. But why does this idea of headless creatures still resonate with us today? Why are we still drawn to the idea of beings whose existence defies the natural order? It's because the Blemmyes are a reflection of our deepest curiosity, our drive to explore the unknown, and our need to confront the things that challenge our understanding of the world. The Blemmyes represent the very essence of what it means to question, to push the boundaries of knowledge, and to explore the mysteries that lie just beyond our reach. They are a reminder that the world is full of things we can't explain, and that our imagination and curiosity will always lead us to seek answers. In modern times, we are surrounded by technology, science, and rational thought. We live in a world where most of the mysteries of the natural world have been uncovered, where we can explain how the body works, how the universe operates, and how life evolved. Yet, despite all of this knowledge, we are still fascinated by the unknown. The Blemmyes remind us that there are still questions that we can't answer, things that we can't explain, and mysteries that will forever elude us. They are a reminder that, no matter how much we know, There will always be something beyond our grasp, something that challenges our understanding of the world and ourselves. This is why the Blemmyes have endured through the centuries. They are not just strange creatures from an ancient time, they are a symbol of the unknown, the mysterious and the unexplored. They represent the things that lie just beyond the boundaries of our understanding, and they remind us that curiosity, imagination, and the desire to explore are timeless. The Blemmyes may have been headless, but their legacy is anything but. In the end, the Blemmyes are not just a part of history, they are a part of the human experience. They represent everything that we do not know, everything that lies beyond the limits of our understanding. And in that sense, they will continue to haunt our imaginations, inspiring us to question, to explore, and to search for answers to the mysteries that still lie ahead. The story of the Blemmyes is not just about strange creatures from the past. It is about the enduring human desire to understand the unknown and to push the boundaries of what we know. And as long as that desire remains, the Blemmyes will continue to live on in our stories, our myths, and our imaginations. As we reach the final stretch of our journey through the strange and captivating legacy of the Blemmyes, it's important to take a step back and appreciate just how much these enigmatic creatures have impacted our cultural psyche. From their origins in ancient texts to their place in modern mythology, the Blemmyes have not only captured the imagination of civilizations long gone, but continue to provoke thought and wonder in contemporary times. We may never know the true nature of the Blemmyes, whether they were real people, a misunderstanding of a culture, or purely fictional creatures, but their symbolic and cultural significance cannot be denied. We've explored the way the Blemmyes have evolved through history, from their initial depiction as headless people with faces on their chests, to their later role as metaphors for the unknown, the strange and the mysterious. But what makes the Blemmyes so timeless isn't just their unusual physical form, it's their ability to represent the mysteries of the human experience, the desire to question, to explore, and to push the boundaries of what we know. The Blemmyes, as strange as they seem, are a reflection of our own curiosity and the deep-seated need to understand the world around us. In the ancient world, when knowledge was limited and the boundaries of the known world were still being explored, the Blemmyes served as a symbol of the unknown. They were an embodiment of the mysteries that lay beyond the reach of human comprehension. The Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, and other ancient civilizations all had their own interpretations of the Blemmyes, but they all saw them as creatures that lived on the fringes of the known world, beings whose very existence challenged the natural order and defied the conventions of human understanding. And it's precisely this defiance of the expected that made the Blemmyes so compelling. They weren't just strange because of their physical appearance. They were strange because they forced people to confront the limits of their understanding and to imagine what lay beyond those boundaries. As we move forward in time, we see how the Blemmyes' legacy evolved during the medieval period. The Middle Ages were a time of superstition, mystery, and deep spiritual concern. The Blemmyes, with their headless forms and faces on their chests, fit perfectly into this worldview. In a time when the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were often blurred, the Blemmyes were seen not just as a curiosity, but as a symbol of everything that was beyond the natural order. They were creatures that represented the mysteries of life and death, the unknown forces at work in the world that couldn't be explained by reason or science. In medieval art and literature, the Blemmyes were often depicted as beings that lived outside the laws of nature, creatures that existed beyond the limits of human understanding. This wasn't just a reflection of their strange anatomy, it was a metaphor for the larger mysteries of existence in the medieval mind. The Blemmyes were a symbol of chaos and the unknown. They were creatures who had transcended the boundaries of the natural world. And in that sense, they were both a reflection of the fear of the unknown and a challenge to the limitations of human knowledge. But the Blemmyes didn't just fade into the shadows after the medieval period. As we moved into the Renaissance, a time when classical knowledge was being revived and reinterpreted, the Blemmyes found a place in the new cultural landscape, no longer seen as a literal truth. The Blemmyes took on new meanings, representing the mysteries of the human experience in ways that fit the intellectual currents of the time. The Renaissance was a period of great curiosity and intellectual exploration, and the Blemmyes, with their headless bodies and faces on their chests, were the perfect embodiment of the era's thirst for knowledge and understanding. Fast forward to the modern world, and the Blemmyes have transcended their origins in ancient myth and medieval legend. While they are no longer seen as a literal part of human history, they continue to appear in modern pop culture movies, books, television shows, and video games. All feature creatures that embody the same strange qualities as the Blemmyes, whether it's the headless aliens of science fiction or the bizarre creatures of fantasy novels. The Blemmyes have evolved into symbols of everything that lies beyond the limits of human understanding. And what's fascinating is that, just as in ancient times, these strange beings continue to captivate our imaginations and challenge our understanding of what is possible. But why do the Blemmyes still fascinate us? Why are we still drawn to creatures that defy the natural order and challenge our understanding of the world? The answer, I believe, lies in the way the Blemmyes symbolise the human desire to explore the unknown. At our core, we are all driven by a curiosity to understand the world around us. We want to know what lies beyond the limits of our perception, what exists in the dark corners of the world that we cannot see. And the Blemmyes represent that curiosity. They are a reminder that there is always more to discover, more to understand, and more to explore. In the modern world, where science, technology, and rational thought often dominate our understanding of the universe, the Blemmyes serve as a reminder that there are still mysteries that defy explanation. They represent everything that we cannot fully comprehend, everything that lies just beyond our reach. The Blemmyes are a reflection of our unyielding desire to understand the unknown, to explore the boundaries of what is possible, and to push the limits of human knowledge. Their legacy lives on because they remind us that the world is still full of strange and unexplained things, and that the human imagination will continue to seek out the answers to the mysteries that lie before us. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Blemmyes is that they are a product of both imagination and reality. They were born out of the desire to explain the strange and unfamiliar, to make sense of the things that could not be understood. And while they may never have existed in the way the ancient texts describe, they represent something much larger than just a strange physical form. The Blemmyes are a reflection of the human need to understand, to explore, and to question. They are a symbol of everything that lies beyond the boundaries of the known world, everything that we cannot yet explain, and everything that we continue to seek answers to. As we come to the end of our journey through the world of the Blemmyes, we are left with a deeper understanding of why these headless creatures have persisted through the ages. They are more than just a curiosity or an oddity from the past. They are a symbol of the human spirit's unyielding desire to explore, to understand, and to question the world around us. The Blemmyes remind us that, no matter how much we learn or how much we discover, there will always be mysteries that remain unsolved. They challenge us to keep asking questions, to keep exploring the unknown, and to keep pushing the boundaries of what we know. The Blemmyes may have been headless, but their legacy is anything but. They will continue to haunt our imaginations, inspiring us to seek out the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplained. And in that search, we will continue to discover more about the world, about ourselves, and about the limits of human understanding.